George Buckley, thank you so much for agreeing to talk to us about driving growth and innovation. You've got an incredible personal story. As a British national, you're the first to run a Fortune 500 company. You grew up in Sheffield and left school without qualifications, started work as an apprentice electrician at a company where you now chair the board, and you went on to gain a degree and a PhD at Huddersfield before emigrating to the US. You became president and chief exec of 3M.
And chairman.
And chairman.
Well, that's it. President, CEO, and chief executive. That's why I had to sort of let the words run over on the business card. There were too many titles. That was my joke. They're going to have to stop printing on the back.
You became president, CEO, and chairman of 3M, one of the world's most innovative companies. And you now chair two industrial giants on both sides of the Atlantic. Here in the UK, you're at the helm of Smiths Group, 5 billion market cap in the FTSE 100. And in the US, you chair Stanley Black & Decker, a 19 billion market cap and the world's largest tool maker. And you're also on the board of PepsiCo.
And Hitachi.
And Hitachi. And you're also on the board of PepsiCo and Hitachi. George, you've said it's very important to have a dream. Can you explain why is that? And who needs to have the dream? Is it the chief exec, the board, or the executive?
Well, I think everybody should have a dream. First of all, I mean, at the personal level, most of us have a dream when we start off in our career. You know, perhaps it's a little fuzzy because we're not quite sure what it means, but at least we have some idea that we want to go forward. In the family level, we often have dreams for our children, our grandchildren, even for our family for that matter. But at the company level, I think it's important to have a dream. Now, you know from personal experience that one of my examples I love to give is this Rodgers and Hammerstein movie, South Pacific. So the scene is set in Bali in World War II, and there's a Balinese lady called Bloody Mary, and she actually does it a couple of times in the movie, but she sings a song called Happy Talk. And I have been caught twice actually singing this song in a presentation. Once at your company, once you let the word leak out, I was forced to do it at another speech I gave afterwards. So I have actually done it twice, but I'm not now going to do it on this particular film. But anyway, the words go something like this. It's happy talky talky, happy talk. Talk about things you like to do. You've got to have a dream. If you don't have a dream, how are you going to have a dream come true? And however hokey that sounds, it's absolutely true, because that dream is the guiding light that, in a sense, that you're drawn to, that you chase, and it clarifies what you're trying to accomplish. When you get and achieve that dream, you know you've achieved success. So I think it's important for companies to have dreams. I think it's important for people to have dreams. And then, in answer to the other part of your question, is who in the company should have those dreams. I think that dream can get painted in multiple different places. So if you have a wonderfully inspirational CEO, that person might be the originator of the dream. And then, of course, what they've got to try to do is inculcate that dream with people that work for them. Or maybe the CEO doesn't have a dream, and that dream might come from the board. It might come from the chairman. It might come from other members of the board. But I think once you can get a leadership team in a company sharing that dream, then they may have slightly different variants on the theme. But I think once you can do that, then this can provide the guiding light for a company to drive its way forward. So I think it's important to have a dream.
Thank you. And you've talked about courage as well as being an important characteristic for a CEO. Why is that? And what is the most courageous decision you've ever taken?
The interesting thing about courage is, you know, we as CEOs, or even as chairman, but in particular as a CEO, you get absolutely barraged by information, by circumstances, and there's never enough time, or often not enough time, or enough information, or enough analysis that you can actually do that will actually give you the answer. Some CEOs exaggerate the power of analysis, and sometimes in some companies you get into this, paralysis by analysis. But I found in my own life, yes, you build up this sort of knowledge base of things. The analysis might tell you one part of the answer, gut or instinct might tell you something else. But in the end, there's nearly always empty gaps. and it needs courage, in particular when there are really big decisions, critical decisions, transformation decisions that happen to a company and to people. That's when real courage comes in. Now, I think some interesting things about what does courage really mean. Generally speaking, people think about courage as being having the strength to carry on when things are going really badly. But I like Napoleon's definition. He said, courage is not having the strength to carry on. Courage is carrying on when you don't have the strength. So I loved Napoleon's definition of that. And so, the courage is mixed with the vision, the dream, sometimes with inspiration, and saying, I'm not exactly sure what I'm going to meet along this road, but I'm absolutely convinced that this road is the right one, and this is the destination I want to get to. But having that inner strength, that sense of will, of belief, that whatever it is that comes along in the obstacles, you'll overcome it, and you will drive toward this dream, this destination.
Can you tell us about one of your most courageous decisions and how you got to make that?
Well, it's probably more than we need on this particular session, but there are two that I would perhaps point out. There are many points, I think, in a person's life where courage is key to taking the next important step. And that could be, in my particular case, it might be believing in a product that you're committed to. It could be a personal circumstance. It could be an external circumstance that visits you. So let's try to quickly canter through a couple of them, but I'll try not to make these sometimes long stories as long as it might be. So one that I was a very young man. I was 31 years old or so. I was in a company, worked in the United States, and I had got a job in another department. It was a large company, scores of thousands of employees. But about the same time, my boss, a man called Larry Gifford, had a heart attack. And he was likely to be off work for 9 months or even a year. In fact, for a time, they weren't even sure if he would survive. And so I had this other job that was actually at the same grade as Larry's, and so everything was going forward. I was going forward to move. But my group head said, "Well, we really don't want you to leave, George." I said, "Well, die's cast. Looks like a good job. I think it'd be interesting." And they said, "Well, we don't want you to leave." They said, "What we'd like to do is we'd like to give you Larry's job." So this is my boss. So my boss is off sick, and they'd like to give me his job. And I said, "No, I can't do that." And he said, "Why ever not?" He said, "Well, it'd be immoral to do that. I mean, this is a man, what if he provides additional stress and he dies? How would I live with myself? How could I live with myself anyway?" And they said to me, "Well, you shouldn't be worrying about Larry, you should be worrying about yourself. And let us worry about Larry." I said, "Well, I'm sorry." His name was Don Wilson, my boss, my boss's boss. I said, "But Don, I think what you're proposing to do is immoral." And without making this story too long, I was wheeled in front of Don's boss, his boss, his boss, in about 4 different levels. To a point in the corporation, as a young man, you can't see, in an organization, you can't really see above 2 levels above where you really are. And I said no each time, and each time I felt very sheepish. I thought I'm ruining my own career by not doing what the corporation wants. I thought, well, am I silly? Will people laugh? But I had the strength of will, the strength of belief that it was wrong to do this. And I think that was an example of personal courage at a relatively young age. In the end, it turned out to be a happy ending, because the man that originally proposed this to me, Tom Wilson, said, "Look, George, I think we've got a solution. What if we promote both of you?" And they ultimately did promote both of us. And I never told anybody in the company about this experience, except for those people that were in this sort of chain of command. But yet, my boss, Larry, when he eventually came back to work, said, I know what you did, and I just want to say how grateful I am and how unusual it is for one so young to have taken a stand like this against some fairly high pressure. And I think at that point in time, I knew that I probably would be okay with some moral tests. I wasn't sure about many other tests in life, but at least on that particular point, I was sure of that. Another one, perhaps completely different, was during the 08-09 downturn. So I was the chairman and CEO of 3M, and of course the wheels were coming off the wagon. Nobody really knew what was happening. The world economy was in virtual collapse, and so in September of 2008, I think our sales dropped by 11%. Now this is a $30 billion sales corporation, worth at the time somewhere around $70 billion. And then next month it dropped by 23, the next month it dropped by 25. And I mean, there's mayhem, complete mayhem. So it's a company with, at that time, around 110,000 employees. And of course, with the average American family of 2.2 children, there's about 400,000 people who depended on you doing the right thing. There was a point where I was going to New York to give an update to investors, as we typically did, typically the beginning of December. And I was on a plane with the CFO traveling to New York. And what we always used to do was practice. All good companies, when you're doing earnings releases or these sorts of things, you not only practice your speech, you practice the Q&A. What's the hardest question these people can ask you? And especially in these kind of really troubled times where literally people just didn't know what was going to happen. You better be fast on your feet. You better have these ideas fixed in your mind. It's not about practicing the words. It's about what's the set of principles I want to describe. So the CFO asked me on this trip, so what's the hardest question you think you can ask, George? I said, well, I think the question would be, okay, Mr. Buckley, you always talked about 3M's diversity and the sort of advantage that has of bringing, maybe some markets are in contraction, some markets are in expansion. It brings a sort of leveling. But unfortunately, that's not what's happening right now. Everything's unwinding. What do you think is the reason? I said, good question. Here's what I think happened. CFO's name was Pat Campbell. I said, Pat, I think the answer to the question is, when you look at different aspects of the economy, in the olden days, Britain, America, Germany, and others had completely independent economies, and they could operate in different periodicities. But what's happened in recent years is the world economies have become much closer because of trade, and so they all have something like the same periodicity. But you can see situations where Germany might be in contraction while America's in expansion, and all I think is that these are sort of like cyclic waves, and I think they've just sort of aligned. And because of the debt crisis, there's no liquidity, and people, of course, are uncertain. And I think everything now is synchronized and gone down together. But this gave me an idea about how to model the economy. Now, we've got to go back and remember that nobody really knew at that time what the causes were, what the remedies were. But yet, as a corporation, we had to forecast to the marketplace. We had to give reassurance to suppliers, to investors, to employees. And so I modeled this over the Christmas holidays. And when the large strategy meeting of the corporation took place in January, so now, and I had practiced on the top 10 people before this. And of course, they come to this meeting and they're worried sick about what's going to happen. And so their default position was, and it's typical in most corporations, sales have collapsed by 25%. We should lay off 25% of the people. And I said, no, guys, this is not what we're going to do. Now I've got 140 or so of the leaders of 3M in front of me. And at that level in 3M, about 3 out of 4 people have a PhD. These are really, really intelligent people. So I said, look, this is what you think is happening is actually not what's really happening. So I said, although our sales have dropped by 25%, the end markets haven't dropped by 25%. Let me explain to you how a drop in the end market amplifies its way up through the supply chain. So when it gets to us, it's a multiple. And I'd actually, behind the scenes, I'd asked the planning people to go and look at this issue historically. I'd experienced it in a previous company. And that multiplication factor in 3M was 2.89. So to an engineer, that's 3. So when I was telling my friends that, look, you've seen sales drop by 25, really it's something less than that. And in fact, if we divide by the 2.89 and then if you assume the wave is sinusoidal, you're correct with a 2-upon pi multiple, the number is about, let's call it 10, roughly speaking. And so if we'd started with that, we'd only lay off 10% of our people, which is roughly speaking 10,000 people. And but I said, but that's not what we're going to do. What we're going to do is something different. I said, there's an important question for us to answer is, how long will this decline take before it turns? And again, nobody really knew that. People thought this is a completely unstable situation. The economy will completely come apart. And I said, no, I'm an engineer, remember. This is a dynamical system, and it will bounce back. It always has, and in my view, it probably always will. This is not the time I think it's going to go wrong. And what I had done, by the way, just as a little bit of data interlude here, I'd studied all the economic cycles in the 107 years previous to 2008. And the longest cycle was 11.1 years. This is peak to peak or trough to trough. The shortest one was 1.1 years. And if you take all of those cycles as an average, the average is 5.3 years, peak to peak or trough to trough. The standard deviation is only 1 year, so you get 70%, roughly speaking, of all cycles are between 5 and 7 years. To an engineer, that's 6. So I looked at where the economic downturn had begun, and I projected that forward. I used my calculations on the supply chain to calculate the amplitude. I put in what we as engineers would call a fifth harmonic, and predicted that the economic turn would come at the end of July in 2009, and it was absolutely smack on. And then I said to my colleagues, going back to the 10,000, I said, look, in a company like this, if you've got a 40-year service life, you have naturally at least 2.5% people are just turning over naturally. Then you have other people that are quitting, they get sick, they move jobs. So our natural turnover is about 3.5%. So we've got 3,500 people queuing, roughly speaking, who are going to retire in the next year. Let's give them some incentive to retire now, but not punish them. Not because ordinarily when you retire, there's an attenuation of your payout, and also you get 1 year less service. So we corrected that. We had 3,500 people or 3,700 people retired. So that nibbled the 10,000 down to 6,300. Then I said, none of us are going to have a pay increase, none of us. That saved us another $165 million and nibbled about another a little less than 2,000 off the number. And then I said, we have all this accrued vacation where people have been able to bank vacation for retirement. I said, we're changing that policy. They can go on vacation now. And by whittling this down, eventually, we laid off 2,000 people. And I wrote communications pretty much every week to the employees about what was happening in the company, what was happening in the economy, according to my view. And so we only laid off 2,000 people, despite my colleagues wanting it to be 25,000. And we predicted where the bottom was, how deep it would be, how long it would last. I was also asked, what are we going to do about R&D, George? Shall we shut it down along with all the other costs? Because in most other places, we jokingly, we cancelled the newspapers and stopped feeding the dog. Everything we could think of to cut costs. But I did write this communication where I used a phrase which became quite famous for a while, which is, in terms of layoffs, I was interviewed by a local newspaper, and I said, yes, we will have some layoffs, probably, it's true. It will be as many as necessary, but as few as possible. And now you think, it's easy for the words to say now, but imagine the turmoil that existed at that time, and having to make these fairly tough stances on what to do, and you're putting the company's future and the future of many people at risk if you don't get it right. And then just to wrap it up with at least a little bit of humour, I do remember driving to work one morning, might have been March or April of 2009, and I was on Interstate 94 driving in towards St. Paul and coming up to the 3M assembly of buildings. I see this very large office building where my office was, and I do remember thinking, oh my goodness me, I hope these people don't realise it's only me coming to work here.
Brilliant.
So at least during all of that, I managed to maintain a sense of reality.
And what was the outcome with the growth of the company after that?
The growth of the company in the following year was somewhere around 15%. We just absolutely, because we did all the R&D, we'd done all the prep work, we hadn't laid off resources that you can't easily, because when you're in an organisation which is about engineering and science, it's in the brains of the people. And you can't, when you let them go, you can't suddenly go find them again. They've gone off and rebuilt their lives and their careers. And so I wanted to have as little impact as possible. So we had the fuel, both the ideas and the people. We just absolutely rocketed out in growth. And it was wonderful that everybody supported this idea, even though many thought, I think George has completely lost his mind. He's trying to forecast things that aren't forecastable. But I will tell you another small humorous story. Around this time, I was giving a speech in Italy about just this kind of thing. And I was on a group of people presenting, and sat next to me was Gary Becker from the University of Chicago, who was a Nobel Prize winner. And so I'd spoken, and Gary said to me, he said, "Gee, George, what's your forecast of maximum unemployment rate in the US now, speaking about?" I said, 10.2%, roughly speaking. He said, I think it's much higher than that. I said, what do you think it is, Gary? He said, I think it's 10.3. I said, Gary, I'm an engineer. I'm sort of forecasting for investors. 10.2, 10.3. I'm not writing an academic paper. I said, yeah, I suppose you're right. Yeah.
As an engineer, can you talk more about innovation? Because we've talked a lot
Yes.
about it. And what do you think the key ingredients are to bring it to a company? And how important is it now with the fourth industrial revolution and the level of disruption that the world economy is facing?
Well, I said not that long ago to an investor that for many, many years I'd lived a secret life. And my secret life was not the second family in Japan or anything like that. I'd always believed in innovation, even before, long time, many, many years before it was popular to think about innovation. And also, by the way, about ESG and CSR. We didn't call them those things at the time. And so I led this secret life. I always did them behind the scenes, but said very little about them, because I was afraid partly that people would criticize me, and partly people would laugh and think it was stupid. And so I always believed in the basic principle that unless you can do something unique, creative, and better, then it wouldn't differentiate you from the competition. But you always search for good ways to describe why this is essential. And I think one of the best ways that I found to explain this was Indra Nooyi, who was then the chairman and CEO of PepsiCo, was talking to me about the need for innovation. I think it was important. Should PepsiCo do more? Should it do less? And I said, to answer your question, Indra, I'd like to ask you 3 or 4 questions. First, I'd like you to think about Coca-Cola as a proxy for our competition. And she said, okay, yeah, go ahead. I said, now I'd like to go down the income statement with me and ask yourself, do you think we can out-procure Coke? In other words, can we buy goods and services less expensively, more effectively than Coke? Probable answer, no. Next question, let's go down to the operations. Do you think we can out-operate Coke? In other words, can we deploy our capital more effectively? Can we get better quality, better throughput, better yield than Coke? Probably no. Next question, let's go to the SG&A line. Do you think we can outsell and outmarket Coke? And they have the highest unaided brand recognition of any brand in the world. So the answer to that question is probably no. So if you can't outprocure somebody in goods and services, you can't out-operate someone in your manufacturing, say, for example, and distribution, and you can't outsell and market them, how do you beat them? The answer is you have to outthink them. And so this is where innovation comes in. It's the only way you can provide the intellectual fuel, the ideas, the persuasion for a customer to move to you from someone else. And so this is why it's absolutely vital. You cannot beat the competition. If you always do what you always did, you really will always get what you always got, as Albert Einstein said in the vernacular. So this is why it's so essential. Then the problem then is partly a scientific one or technical one. What are the ideas? Another part of it is a cultural idea, a culture in the company. Because most people aren't used to having to innovate. I mean, at some level they do. And people, generally speaking, think of innovation as risky. Well, what if we do it and it doesn't work? I always pose the question, what if you don't? That in itself was born of another little idea when I was made the CEO of Brunswick. So it's going back a little bit, of course, now. And in a meeting, it was on my first day on the job, and I had to give the mandatory speech to a group of employees. And there was one man in the audience asked me two great questions. He said, "George, what if we continue to do all this leadership training and development and people leave?" Now, it might seem sarcastic on replay, but it was one of those impulse things. I said, what if we don't and they stay? And so that idea of, well, look, innovation may be risky, but what if you don't? What if you don't change? You can never be better than average. And why would you want to be average? So is there anybody here? I often would say that in a meeting. Anybody here in there? Put your hands up, you want to be average. So these ideas, I think, always compelled me to believe that that it was something absolutely necessary, something vital for companies to do. That if you don't innovate, you probably won't survive, let alone succeed, because you have to be willing to get rid of what you've already got. So, for example, if you've been a manufacturer of glasses. If you don't innovate in glasses, then all the other glass manufacturers are either going to do the same as you, or if they innovate, you get left behind. So innovation is absolutely vital for the future, no question in my mind.
What are the core ingredients to make it happen?
Optimism. So you can't be a creator if you're not optimistic. You don't find pessimistic people who are creators. The hand wringers, the whalers, the gnasher of teeths. They're not creators. And the other thing is, you have to have curiosity. It's, glass is interesting. Maybe we can do this on the spot. It's not particularly revolutionary idea, but I look at this glass, and if we were making it this at 3M, we'd say, maybe we could make the glass wall a little thinner. I wonder if they'd notice if we took off 3 millimeters off the top. Or, my word, look at all that glass on the bottom, wasted material there. So we'd be continually looking at how can you cut the cost, how can you make the glass feel better in the hand. And it doesn't matter what it is, anything around this table or the room that we're in today, there's always a way you can make it better. And having that belief system is vital for people. But of course, initially, it's quite uncomfortable for people. Or what if I get it wrong? And so it's essential that you create an environment as a leader where people can give it a try. And sometimes they're going to get it wrong. Not all ideas work out. Not even the ideas I've had work out all the time. Some do, some don't. But you have to get used to the idea that something can be better, and if I don't try it, I won't make it better. But if I do, I might. So dealing with this sort of uncertainty, it's another little subtlety as well. It's amazing how people are afraid of risk, but they're not afraid of uncertainty. So if you get them to appreciate it, it's not really risky, but even the difference between success and failure. You could have moved an idea down the pathway. You may not have moved it as much as you thought, but you've still moved it forward ahead. So it's partly scientific and it's partly cultural.
And you come on to the question of the team that you put together to create innovation. And research shows that many leaders don't perform well when they face new and different challenges. So how do you approach putting that team together?
There's an article in The Economist magazine, and if I remember it correctly, I think I've given it to you in the past or told you about it in the past. It's called How to Run a Company Well, and it's from, I think if I remember, October 23rd issue, 2003. I'm just doing that from memory, so maybe I'll get a little bit wrong, but it's called How to Run a Company Well, and it's the 10 rules of the road, shall we say, about what you need to do as a leader. One of the rules in there is you must try to surround yourself with people who are better at what they do than you are at what you do. Now, a lot of people find that uncomfortable. They think, well, they're better at what they do than I'm at what I do. Maybe they'll get my job. But actually, I can assure you, it's a money-back guarantee of success. If you surround yourself with people who are better at what they do than you are at what you do, it's an absolute guarantee of success. So, but that takes, again, good EQ. It takes self-confidence. I don't mean necessarily ego or arrogance, but that you can be comfortable with somebody who's actually in the room smarter than you are. But in the end, they will lift you and they'll lift everybody else. So this is the way to be successful. Then, of course, is how to pick them. And you know this very well because you're in this industry. Now, I jokingly say that a resume is a record of someone's career with all the successes embellished and all the failures removed. And so sorting the wheat from the chaff is an interesting thing. So one of the ways that I've tried to do that is, if I can, and some people won't like this idea, but I like to hire people who have proven records of success. So it's usually somebody I might know, maybe from the distant past, or someone I trust knows. So I think it's a way of enhancing the chances for success. It's not a guarantee, but it's a much better way of enhancing, I think, your chances of success. So that's
and
how I go about it.
what lessons have you learned about getting it right and getting it wrong over the years?
You mean in terms of people?
Yes.
Yes. Well, the first rule is you don't get it all right. You know, people don't obey the laws of physics, unfortunately. So sometimes you get it wrong. I think the biggest mistake that I've made, and I think many people that I know make the same mistake, is we maybe make two parallel mistakes, two connected mistakes. One is that we get so good at fixing businesses and fixing technology, we think we can fix people. I found in my life that's not probably a good idea. And the other mistake that I've made, and I think many people make, is we wait too long. When we realize we've made a mistake, we really ought to act, most of us, a little faster than we traditionally do. And of course, there are some things that surprise you, and there are some things which is absolutely non-negotiable. People who are bright, but they make bad ethical mistakes, even if they're good, that's not forgivable. So ethics, morals, acting quickly, and realizing that you will get some of this wrong. I think they're kind of the lessons I've learned. I have learned a few other lessons, and that is that you nearly always can get a little bit more with sugar than you can with salt. I don't mean necessarily that you have to be soft, but people want to feel comfortable, and it's important as a leader that you create an environment where people can be themselves. However, again, folksy this might sound, or hokey this might sound, this is not a movie and I'm not starring in it. Might actually not literally be true here in this particular case, but in either case. But the point is, work is not a movie and we're not starring in it. And so you don't want people coming to work acting as executives or acting how they think they should, but rather you want them to be themselves. You want to create an environment where the real natural person can shine through. And they're a bit different. And good leaders have a way of dealing with this, of knowing that Janet might prefer things this way, John might prefer things that way, and you learn how to deal with this. I don't mean this in any kind of bad way, but almost in a way that a conductor in an orchestra, you bring in the violins, you bring in the bassoon or whatever it would be. And we are all individuals, and so we need a little bit of individuality, both in the way we express ourselves and the way that other people treat us. So I think if you can create that environment and create especially an environment of trust, these are the great building blocks in my mind that make great organizations. Trust, intelligence, vision, dream, drive, people being able to express themselves freely and openly without fear of punishment. I think these are the great ingredients of fine organizations.
And you're describing there a very inclusive environment, which is where the debate about diversity is heading fast. I wondered what your views are on diversity, especially in the industrial sector at the moment.
Well, you'd expect me to say that I believe in diversity. Again, happens to, as Kissinger had said, have the additional benefit of being true. But just to sort of demonstrate my commitment to that, when I got to 3M, so this is a large international corporation, and of that top 140 people that we spoke about before, when I got there, 44% of the people were not born in the United States. When I left, it was 82.
Wow.
So we pursue diversity in its broadest sense. Yeah. And we really didn't care, what color God painted you or what parts he added or what parts he took away. We really didn't care about that kind of stuff. And so there's a richness, a wholesomeness, if you want to say it that way, that comes from people that have differing ideas than you do, because not all your ideas are right, and they may not be right, probably wouldn't be right when set in another context, in particular an international one. So I think diversity is vital for all organizations if you really want to engage with a wide range of ideas that can help you navigate your way through sometimes some tricky waters. And so very positive, essential as far as I'm concerned, and I can't imagine a company working well any other way.
And tell us more about your thoughts about integrating smaller agile companies into large companies, because you've said size and scale matter. So how do you maintain the agility and the energy that comes with those smaller companies when they're acquired into a large organisation?
Well, you have to remember that all large companies were once small companies. General Motors was once a bunch of people working in a little workshop somewhere, and obviously we know the story of Bill Gates and Paul Allen and Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak and their colleagues creating new companies. So even though something's small, it doesn't mean that it's not significant in an organizational way. And what you have to do, and this is one of the real challenges for corporations, is not to kill off the fledglings, the emerging ideas. And the problem is, in corporations today, we make almost all judgments based on finance. So if it's not making any money today, and it can't make, when it's on a product launch, it can't make $500 million, then it's really not worthwhile us paying attention to. But that's really a completely false assumption in my view. So you have to create an environment, an incubator if you like, where these things can be nurtured, can be protected. Often they need to be led by somebody who feels affection, shall we say, toward these and commitment toward these groups. So that's one way, is to set up incubators, and for the CEO, by the way, to protect them. Usually protect them against the CFO, usually. Not always, but usually. Not necessarily picking on CFOs, but their job is to sort of count the pennies. And another idea that I've used, which is becoming more popular today, is to set aside a certain amount of money to invest in emerging ideas in it's called corporate venturing. And so you look for small startup companies, you take a small equity stake, maybe you have a call on the equity if you want to integrate this into the company. And then usually what we would do is we'd have a possible target adopter inside the corporation, and we would get one of those people there to sit on the board of the small company, partly to give them advice, partly to learn, by the way. You know, all great experiences are part teaching and part student. So these are a few of the mechanisms that you can use to protect these organizations. But I think this idea of, remember, they're all large companies, we're once small companies. And these small companies today are potentially large elements of your company in the future. You must find a way to protect them and encourage them.
And you said that size and scale do matter. Is there another model where smaller companies can punch above their weight?
Usually on science, they can. And what, of course, has happened in recent times is, in particular with the internet, where, I mean, you can start a company today with almost no resources. Maybe some cash, of course, you need, but and of course the idea, certainly with IT organizations or software-based companies. So you may have got a demand, and you've got an asset, and the question is, how do you link them? So obviously Airbnb and Lyft and Uber are classic examples, but there are many others. You could have exactly the same idea of linking what we would call in America supply teachers. So if someone's off, how do you get a teacher in? You could do the same with nurses. You could do it almost with any resources where there's an asset and a demand linking them. So they're clearly places where people can punch above the weight. Obviously, hugely inventive companies that make phenomenal breakthroughs in a particular science or a particular product. Medical, you see this often in medical businesses or pharmaceutical businesses. Fighting the system of approval can be a challenge in medical, for all the right reasons, by the way. You're trying to protect the public from things that seem good at the time but may not necessarily prove to be good in the long term. So yes, there are companies that can punch above the weight, but I think in the end there are certain classes of business, automotive manufacturing. Very, very difficult to be a small manufacturer, and nearly always then you're outsourcing some of the engineering. So companies like Morgan, wonderful, unique design, quirky, but fun. So that's a small company that's managed to, in a sense, punch above its weight, and its brand is well recognized, even though probably much larger than, in a sense, the size of the company. Aston Martin's another one, but it's slightly different there. It's a luxury high-performance car. It takes a lot of money to develop high-performance engines. So as we've seen in that particular case, they are now realized that it takes so much money and there are a lot of other great high-performance engines around. And for the most part, especially in cars, people are persuaded by what they see and touch. I call it interfaces. So you're in a car, we'll make this short, but your interfaces when you first see it is a visual one. Is it beautiful? Your next one is when you grab the handle. Does it open and close the door? Does it feel like a BMW? But then they're masters at that sort of sense of great closure on doors. Then the next interface is when you sit in the seat, it's between your bottom and the seat, and then between your hands and the steering wheel, and then when you start the car, between your ear. And these are the interfaces you should manage that manage the sort of the aura of a company. So I don't think anybody's really going to care if the gearbox was made by Aston Martin, say, for example, or whatever. The engine, they might, the gearheads like me probably might maybe more attracted by something, but most people aren't. So I think it depends on where you are. But in some cases, it's easier for a company to punch above its weight. But there are just some things in the end where size really does matter.
So how do you see the economy evolving over the years as the technology revolution moves into the industrial sector?
Well, there's lots of changes, of course, as you might expect me to say, but I think the three great crystal balls on the future are mathematics, electronics, and materials science. What do I mean by that? You think, well, what's mathematics got to do with it? But mathematics is the root of all data analysis, data mining, artificial intelligence, machine learning, genetic algorithms. This is all mathematics. We tend to think of, we often say software. Software is only a vehicle. Of course, you have to have efficient software, but it's the algorithm development that's the real key here, which is why I always say mathematics, not software. Now, electronics, because incredible computational power that has to carry, by the way, sometimes these algorithms, or it might be a set of sensors. One of the great revolutionary breakthroughs are little ARM chips that were developed at the University of Cambridge. Fabulous technology. So whether it's sensing, whether it's machine vision, many of these sorts of things all depend on electronics. And last but not least, why do I say material science? I think about things like graphene, single molecular layer of carbon, incredible conductor, 5 times the strength of steel. And when we can make graphene in commercial sizes and volumes, it's going to transform so many aspects of material science. One of the most impressive demonstrations that I've seen, I'll probably give you a couple. One is when I first joined 3M, my friend Fred Polensky, who was the chief technology officer, showed me 2 jars, kind of like Kilner jars, big jam jars. And in one he had calcium carbonate, chalk basically, and he shook the glass, and the chalk stuck to the inside of the glass, and so on and so forth. And he had another jar with nanoparticles in. He took a teaspoonful of nanoparticles, put it in the calcium carbonate, shook it, and it behaved like milk. I was absolutely amazed. And another demonstration that I saw was actually, oddly enough, in fishing rods. I'm a fisherman, so I love fishing rods. And I'd gone to visit Hardy in the north of England, in Onik, and they were using 3M titanium nanoparticles to enhance the strength of the rod. Now, ordinarily, when you've got a fishing rod, of course, you've got a fish on, and the rod bends. And what companies like Hardy would do is they would typically, the rod's got to bend 270 degrees and not break. And Hardy with traditional materials were able to do that. But what they showed me was they took a rod made from 3M materials and they could wrap it around almost like a rope. And you look at it, and even though you know how this stuff works, it's still amazing to see the transformation that it has. Of course, you now see it in airplanes, very lightweight, very high strength composites. I think 787, I don't know what percentage, a very large percentage of the materials in its construction composites, material science. So these are the 3 great crystal balls in my mind on the future, and these are the things that are going to transform industry. They're going to transform them in machine vision, in robotics, in machine learning, in AI more generally, neural networks. And it's amazing how much pattern recognition, mathematical taxonomy, these are the kind of things. It's amazing how much insight you can extract from the data. I mean, we think about, we talk about big data, but really that's not the key. It's big information is the key. So it's how do I extract insight and guidance and information from the data, and you do that with mathematics. These are the great tools which will change industry and products.
And what needs to be done to make sure the workforce is ready for this?
Well, obviously there's retraining that both organisations and perhaps societies have to find a way to make sure it happens. And we tend to think that these things are going to rob everybody of their jobs, and that probably isn't true. Yes, there are sectors of the economy which have been affected dramatically by globalization, even sometimes by technology. But what tends to happen is when you look at periods of time, we may not consider them short as humans, but let's think about all the things that existed in 1850 or 1880 in London. I mean, we don't see bridle manufacturers, not very big ones anyway. We don't see carriage manufacturers, and yet there aren't a lot of carriage manufacturers that are unemployed. So society sort of adapts and adjusts, and some opportunities close, new opportunities emerge, and what's important is to try to keep up with that. Society should provide the necessary means, I believe. It's one role of government, I think, and of companies as well, where they can continue to train and familiarize. And it's amazing how many people, I mean, all of us, when we start in our lives, we know nothing. And everything that we've accumulated today, we've learned. And some people say, well, it's too hard for me, or I'm too old for this. But there's an awful lot of other people that are willing and ready and are inspired by the chance of adapting and adjusting. And this is how we will ultimately deal with these things. So yes, some classic jobs will disappear, but other new ones we can't even forecast today will appear to substitute.
Coming round to the theme of leadership that we started with, do you think the leaders of the future need to be any different to the leaders of the past?
In broad terms, probably not, except probably have to be a little more agile, because the rate of change seems to be continue to accelerate. It just does. It has, and it does. And imagine the great changes that took place between, the sort of the feudal society, agrarian society, and then post-industrial revolution. Massive changes. That kind of change is appearing before us now. I can remember as a young engineer, the first machine that I programmed was an Elliott 4120 with 4K of memory that I programmed in machine code. Even when I did my PhD, I had an IBM 1130 with 13.2K of memory. And you had to pay a lot more attention to very efficient software and very efficient numerical analysis back there in those days. But today, I think the computer that Neil Armstrong and his colleagues moved to get to the moon, there's more computing power in your telephone today. Maybe even in one of these dimmable lights today. It's amazing, and these are the great opportunities, I think, for the future.
Thank you very much.